guys, and welcome. My name is Jo, and I am the CEO of NaviStar Legal. And today we are talking to Jacob Enoch. Hi, Jacob. How are you?
How are you?
And Jacob is a senior partner and head of M&A at Firon and Company. Jacob, thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about the law of business and the business of law, and within that, we're going to talk a little bit about the arbitration and M&A markets that you work with. First of all, I wanted to say I can see a little bit of traffic outside of your window. It looks like things are starting to move. How are things there in Tel Aviv?
Well, actually, I think the lanes that you see are actually the ones that are. There's something wrong with the voice somehow. Anyway, the lanes that you see, I think, are actually the less busy ones. The busier ones are out of the frame, and Tel Aviv is more or less back to normal. Restaurants are about to be opened. Some have been opened against not in accordance with the instructions of the Ministry of Health. But they're going to be formally open next week. And other than that, more or less everything is up and running.
Good to hear, good to hear. Glad that, and how have you guys been impacted over the last couple of weeks? Or has it impacted you at all? Certainly from an M&A perspective, what are you seeing in the markets?
Well, first of all, most of the law firms have, if not all of them, have been working from home for at least a few weeks, but work has continued. It doesn't mean that all deals continued, and some fell through. Some new ones emerged, but there's definitely work going on, and over the last couple of weeks, we're almost back to normal, almost 100%. There are people working from home still. The education system, the schools are up and running, but not full speed. So there are issues with parents and so forth. But all departments are working, all floors here are back with people again. That's good to see.
Oh, great. Good news. Well, look, I want to find out from you. Tell us a little bit about your background, your journey into law, and your transition almost to becoming a partner and becoming, well, I'll say a business owner, because it is really.
Well, it's a partner in a business. And well, I started with law, but I had sort of a tour outside the legal profession and outside the state of Israel as well. I started with a law degree and a business degree, and I actually started as a lawyer in the Israeli military, in the army, as part of, you know, probably that there's mandatory military service in Israel. After that, I worked as a lawyer for a while, but then I found myself as an investment banker working for Salomon Smith Barney in Manhattan. After that, I was an executive vice president for an Israeli software company here in Israel with international operations, still a client of mine to date. And then I find myself back to back practicing law, and always with quite a diverse practice. I've always been doing both transactional work and dispute resolution. So I'm doing litigation, international arbitration, and so forth. But I also had the M&A department here. We do all sorts of very interesting international and local transactions. And I usually like to think that by virtue of all that and having done all that, I have somewhat of a broader perspective to offer clients, at least when they are willing to listen. Sometimes they just want you to do the paperwork. So that's in a nutshell where I am.
Your background, you had quite a dramatic story to tell in Manhattan, right? You were working in Salambani, did you say? And then yeah.
It's part of Citigroup. I don't know if it's traumatic, but it's definitely interesting. You know, we moved to New York from Tel Aviv, and it was right at the center or the middle of the period during which Tel Aviv was under many terror attacks, bombings, and so forth. So it was rather an unstable period. We moved to the States, and with the professional life being extremely hectic, everything else, and of course New York being what it is, still things seem to be relatively sane, believe it or not something you usually hear about New York. But then September 11th happened. I happened to see that from the window of our offices there.
Wow.
88 Greenwich Street, Tribeca. I actually saw the first building on fire and the second plane hit, and then everything changed. So it seemed like the craziness of the situation that was then present in Tel Aviv followed me to New York. But things here have changed a lot. I mean, things here are very safe and very stable, have been for years. And I think so are they in New York as well.
Yeah, thank goodness. No, I guess this is the first time. I mean, you shared that with me when we were talking about crises and kind of international crises, and how that was kind of the last big international crisis that hit. Even though it was in New York, it affected so many more individuals rather than just those people. You know, but it wasn't just Americans that were.
The impact was so much greater than the lives lost. I mean,
right.
The fact that the lives were lost there under such circumstances had immense repercussions all over the world.
Right.
That's obvious. But I think that what we're seeing today is, in terms of the long-standing repercussions, may prove to be more significant. I mean, obviously, September 11th changed the way we look at homeland security and things like that. But in many, and of course, many things, many minor things in our daily lives in places like the US and Europe, places where the very notion of going through someone's bags or luggage when they enter a mall or something like that was unheard of. So things like that have changed. I remember presenting my employee ID when I went below Canal Street in New York. The concept of presenting an ID was something that again was unheard of unless you were stopped by a policeman and were required to produce a driver's license. So some things like that have changed. The security,
checking on security in planes, right? Those were huge changes, weren't they?
Security in airports and so forth changed dramatically, but mostly things got back to normal, I think. I think that here it's going to take longer, and some things may well never get back to how they were before. But I think we all have a tendency to adapt, and we'll probably see a lot of that. Things will get back to different normal, I guess.
They're a resilient race, the human race.
Yeah.
It's very resilient. Right, well, yes. And I wondered so going from being an employee to, and I know you say partner in a business. I do see it as business owner, like in a law firm. It is your business. It may be that you share it with others, but how did you make that adjustment from being paid a salary to being paid and having to kind of bring in work and do the business development? How did you make that adjustment?
that's the real transition. I mean, there have been a few, because obviously when I got out of the army, very soon thereafter, I actually opened a small law firm with a couple of partners.
Right.
Or make sure that we have clients to tend to. Then I went to the States. I became obviously an employee again, and when I returned, I was a senior employee, but still an employee in a company. And when I returned to the practice of law, I was immediately a partner. So there have been many transitions, but I don't think that I don't think that the transition toward thinking about business development and business generation was that significant, because that was there all along, even as an employee, and certainly more or less at any point in time where I was practicing law. I always thought about bringing business and potential clients and so forth.
So what was the transition? What was the thought process? What was the thought change for you in those kind of different stages of your career? What was it that shifted for you?
I think the interesting thing is that in retrospect, it was mostly opportunistic. I had all sorts of plans to begin with, but that's not how things turned out. So I sometimes say that when I left the army, I didn't know I would go to America. When I went, I thought I wouldn't return. When I returned, and I didn't think I would return to the practice of law. So opportunities presented themselves and made sense, and I was open to consider them, and that's how things evolved. And there have been quite a few changes, but here I've been for over 14 years now, so I've sort of settled down.
We grow up, don't we? And we're like, okay, no, this is right. I can stay exactly where I'm staying right now. Do you? We kind of talked about a little bit about your M&A practice. Do you have a passion project at the moment? Something that you're working on that you're like, I love to do this, and if you weren't getting paid for it, you would still do it?
Well, I enjoy the practice of law in general, and even when I left it, I always said, even in real time, that unlike most lawyers who leave the legal profession, and there are many, as you know, my choice to do so wasn't motivated by a dislike towards the profession. So I don't think that there's a pet project per se. I think that I like the fact that I'm exposed to many new issues as a matter of you know, in the course of my ordinary course of business. I'm exposed to and I learn new things all the time. It may be a new company with a new idea. You know, we do startup work as well. It may be a new jurisdiction where I haven't done a transaction in before. And of course, when you deal with litigation, there are always new things, because in many cases, you just come about things that you've never done before, sort of projects, relationships, sets of circumstances, areas of the law, other legal systems, because I do international arbitration and international disputes. So many times you learn and you understand that there are different legal perspectives on the same issues, on the same questions. There are many different legal perspectives. In each jurisdiction would have its own approach. So I think the main thing is that this diversity keeps my life interesting, and that's important. Intellectually stimulating, I would say.
I was going to say that. I feel like there's an intellectual element to learning about other people's businesses and kind of understanding how they work and how they tick, and because if every individual is a little bit different, aren't they? The people that you're dealing with, it's never the same problem twice, because even if they had the same problem, they deal with things in such a different way. I really relate to that. That's what I love about working with businesses as well.
It is you can have the exact same set of circumstances, but it would be an entirely different matter depending on the individuals involved. You literally could have the same case, but the strategy and the way you would go about dealing with it would change 180 degrees based on the individuals involved. Your client and the other party as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I guess, there are infinite possibilities there, aren't there? I wondered with you were sharing with me about the arbitration and this idea that I think it's a theoretical idea that you've come up with. Why don't you share a little bit about that? Because I think that sounds like something that really gets you going.
I've been trying to an idea apropos the corona crisis. I don't know if we've seen some traction, but I don't know if it's actually going to be very popular. But I thought that it made a lot of sense given the very extreme circumstances and the fact that I think more or less everyone agrees that these circumstances and the full impact of what had happened was unexpected. It makes a lot of sense for parties to contractual or legal relationships to instead of take unilateral action with the intention of improving their positions towards a potential legal conflict. It makes sense that parties would instead work together to try and renegotiate or recut their deals in a way that would make them more appropriate to the new circumstances, but would take into account the pain that is there and the need to share it equitably. And by way of agreement and negotiations, reach new understandings that would resolve any issues that have already occurred, and B, possibly put in place mechanisms that would better deal with further developments, some obviously uncertain, that are still to come, and that are related to that crisis that we're having. I think
blameless, a way of removing, because there is nobody to blame at the moment. It's kind of automatically taking the blameless position and renegotiating, isn't it? It's renegotiating.
No, I think the fact that unlike most conflicts or most conflicts in the making, parties don't feel that other parties are to blame. I mean, there's a larger, higher willingness to accept the concept that everyone is surprised and everyone is facing circumstances that are unforeseen, at least to a certain extent, and that certainly no one has caused this to happen or could have prevented it, and so forth. These facts that are in most cases are not present, because it doesn't matter who's to blame. Usually you would have two or more parties, each thinking that someone else is to blame, and no one thinking that everyone is blameless. Under the circumstances that we're having now, there's a good basis to start, as mostly people would agree that there's no blame per se, that there may be reasons to argue that someone is more responsible or less responsible, or is the appropriate party to assume a certain risk. But the fact that it would usually be agreed that there's no blame makes it much easier psychologically to start negotiating with willingness to share the consequences of the circumstances that had developed.
Yeah, so it's not just no blame, but it's also seeing how both parties can come together and work together to find an appropriate way forward, right? In advance of there being an issue, rather than because it is likely that things are going to slow down. So it's like, okay, how can we renegotiate this, not from one particular person's perspective? I think it's a great idea, and I think it would be something. Unfortunately, what I feel happens, and maybe this is not the case, but I think that often people get to the end of that point before they then call the lawyer in. So you kind of get to the point. I mean, I've been in this exact position recently, where you attempt to negotiate it, and you attempt, and you think person to person, that's the way to do it. You almost don't want to bring the lawyer in because you don't want it to be, to go legal. You want to keep it very high level. So how do you?
My idea was that, I mean, obviously, if two parties are mature enough and have a strong level of trust, mutual trust, there's no reason for them not to do it themselves without involving their lawyers or a third-party lawyer. But I thought that the advantages of the idea are such that you can use the same tools you use in mediation, because many times the two parties do not enjoy a high level of trust and can't really leverage that trust because it's not there. And in such cases, it makes a lot of sense, for example, to have a third party neutral with whom you can discuss what it is that you really are concerned about, and what it is that you really want to achieve, and what it is that you're really willing to concede, without such information being disclosed to the other party. And under such circumstances, and not to mention the fact that a third party neutral can always bring a fresh perspective, a new point of view. But on top of that, such a party can be made familiar with certain facts and circumstances and considerations that you may not want to share with the other party, because you don't trust them and you don't know if they're going to use it later on, if a legal conflict does arise, if they use it against you. Even if it's not admissible per se, the fact that they know what makes you tick is significant. So to the extent that the trust isn't there, but the genuine, the sincere will to avoid unnecessary conflict, which is, of course, a way to increase uncertainty and to increase unnecessary costs. If the willingness to avoid that is there, then many times it would make sense to sit with someone who's impartial, does not represent either party, but may have good ideas as to how to restructure a transaction or a contractual relationship to avoid unnecessary litigation. And I think that could be very useful and very lucrative, actually, to the parties, that they can save a lot of money and a lot of aggravation as well.
A lot of time, money, and energy. Yeah, right. All the good stuff that's worthwhile. Yep. Well, I'm so glad that you guys are back on top, that you guys are back starting. Anyway, your view is incredible, and I'm just watching the cars just now, like filter down. It's obviously the end of the day there. What time is it there? What time is it? 9 o'clock?
It's 7 p.m.
7 p.m. Okay, so a couple of hours ahead of us. So it's dying down after rush hour. Well, look, thank you so much, Jacob, for joining us and telling us about mediation, telling us about your story and your experience. I would love to know how we can get in contact with you. How can businesses that are looking to do international arbitration, or they're looking to do M&A either in Tel Aviv or elsewhere, how can they get in contact with you? What's the best way of them finding you?
Probably two best ways to go about it. One is by email, of course, and it's jacob_e@firon.co.il. People can always reach me on my mobile, of course, as well, through WhatsApp or good old phone calls. That would be +972 545 229 228. And everything is to be found on our website, of course. You have all the details there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for those who want to hear more about the business law and the law of business. Then you can subscribe right down here, or it may be here. I'm not sure which side, but you can join us. You can subscribe. Thank you, Jacob, for joining us and sharing a little bit about your experience and give us some wisdom. And see you guys again soon. Thank you so much for joining.